Ed and I met each other in June 2005 and quickly realized that we both really loved adventure. So this particular adventure includes a mountain called Split Mountain, which is 14,120 feet or something like that. So we gear up, get all our stuff together, drive down to Bishop, spend the night at the Best Western Hotel where we always sleep when we go down there. Next day, headed off for the trailhead, and it's a 5-mile hike up to base camp. Get to base camp, and it's just great. It's at a lake called Red Lake, and we were the only people up there at the time. As it turned out, Tuesday, September 1st, 2009, would be one of the worst days of my life. The day began perfectly. Ed and I cuddled for the first time in our brand new double-wide Big Agnes sleeping bag until about 5:30 a.m. We started the day by praying together and asking God to direct our steps and give us safety as we climbed Split Mountain. Well, we began our hike with high hopes for a quick ascent and then a quick return back to camp. We were planning to hike all the way out and drive home the next day because we both had to be back to work on Wednesday. So at about 11 a.m., we were at 12,400 feet. I'd gotten really tired, and Ed said, well, I'm going to go ahead and make summit. And I said, okay, well, I'll just sit right here and wait for you. So at about 1:07 in the afternoon, another hiker came up the mountain, and he sat down and we talked for about half an hour, 20 minutes, half an hour, and his name was Patrick Lasso. Well, after we chatted for a little while, Patrick went on his way, and he too was planning to summit the mountain. Well, the sun was beginning to leave the place on the mountain where I was, so I decided that I would move down that icy scree all by myself to where I had left our empty red water bottles and my helmet. Well, it was probably about 5 o'clock at this time, and I hadn't seen Ed since about 11 o'clock in the morning. At this point, I was definitely worried. I was scared. I didn't know why he wasn't down yet. I began to cry, and then, of course, just began to sob. And so I stood up and said, okay, God, I'm going to look back there one more time, and please let me see my Ed. So I turned around and looked, and I was completely overwhelmed because I saw a person on the top of the ridge. And again, I began sobbing and just frantically waving our 2 red water bottles, shouting, Ed, Ed, is that you? Where are you? Come down. Well, first I noticed his hat, and it was a wide-brimmed hat. And I knew that Ed was wearing his beanie that day. And my heart and body just sank, and I just kind of fell into the rocks, and I cried uncontrollably because at that moment I knew that it wasn't Ed, it was Patrick who was coming down from the mountain. And he said, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I have not seen Ed. Patrick said that he would be willing to hike out and drive into the town of Bishop. And so I gave him our phone number and said, I told him, please just call the girls. It doesn't matter to me what time it is. I just want them to know that we're okay. And then I told Patrick about our friend Kurt Wedberg, who has SMI. So I asked if he would please call Kurt in the morning, also the search and rescue office and the place where you get your permits, and just let people know that Ed was missing at this point. Patrick and I parted ways. He went on his way, and I trusted that he was going to call you and Adriana and that he would follow through with those requests that I had. So, put my thermals on, climbed into our new double-wide sleeping bag, and just cried my heart out and cried out to the Lord. And as soon as it began to get light, like just before it got light, I got up, got my clothes on, put my backpack on. Thankfully, Ed had left the keys to the truck at camp, and just frickin' hightailed it out of there as fast as I could. When I got to the truck, I called 911, and to my amazement, the call went through. And it was 9:45 in the morning, and I was so relieved to hear the operator on the other end of the phone. She put me directly in touch with Terry Waterbury, who was the man in charge of search and rescue. Terry had just gotten the information, and he was waiting to hear from me. And so I told him the story, and he told me that he'd have a CHP helicopter from Victorville, which was 2 hours away, as soon as possible. So from the initial phone call with Terry, I knew that I was in good hands. The next morning, I woke up at 7:30. I just sat down at the table, and the phone rang. It was Terry, and he said, "Ed has been found." And I was just like, "You found him? Is he okay? Is he alive?" And he said that Ed was found alive. And he says he's dehydrated and a little hungry, but he's okay. And I said, "Oh my gosh, I'll be there as fast as I can." Hugged each other for a super, super long time and kissed each other many, many, many times. And we drove back to the hotel, and he was just so exhausted, from being out on his wilderness experience. And so I remember just helped him getting undressed and helping him into the shower, and it was kind of first things first. Then started making all the phone calls to tell everybody that he was safe and that he was okay and that we'd be coming home the next day. And here we are to tell the story.